everyone, and good afternoon. I guess in direct contrast to our previous presenters, I represent a very small museum in Strathroy, Ontario, but commend you for your work. It's pretty incredible. We were somewhat overwhelmed with our project, so I can just imagine all the work that went into yours. And thank you to the OMA for the opportunity to present today to our colleagues on our experiences. My project that I'm presenting today is the life and legacy of Sir Arthur Currie. For those who are not aware of his story, Sir Arthur Currie was a general in the First World War. He was born just outside of Strathroy in a small rural hamlet called Napperton, and went to school in Strathroy at our Strathroy District Collegiate Institute. And as a young man, he went out west searching for work and ended up in Victoria, BC, and dabbled in real estate and joined the 5th BC Regiment and as a gunner, and sort of rose through the ranks to become commander of Canadian Division in the First World War, and then eventually commander of the Canadian Expeditionary Force, and had an enormous impact on Canada's role in the First World War. So sort of like Bev had mentioned with John McCrae, Sir Arthur offered a direct local connection for us as a community museum, but he is a figure of national historic significance that we felt would appeal to other audiences. It could have been told by many other institutions. As I mentioned, he had connections with Victoria. Post-war, he was Chancellor of McGill and made significant changes to that institution. So there's different institutions across Canada that could have told the story, but we felt that we brought a unique perspective, given that we could speak to the impact of his rural, humble upbringings in southwestern Ontario and how that shaped his character and his life. So that's just a bit of an overview on Currie. Today I'm going to focus on how we, as a small institution, developed an exhibit with limited funds and had to get a bit creative with staff resources being somewhat limited as well. That's just an image of the exhibit, and we'll go through some of the components in more detail. Just some of the topics to be covered quickly: introduce our staff team, looking at what motivated the project, recognizing our funding sources, and then going through some of the specific design pieces. Here's our design team. We actually only have 2 dedicated staff people at the museum. That's Crystal Loyst and Jordan Brennan on the far right there. Couldn't afford to send us all here, so we drew straws, and I got to present, and then they'll get to go to the OMA conference. I'll have to stay home, so that's the deal. But we have a fantastic team. Brianna Hammer on the lower right, she has since left us and come to the dark side of the municipal world at our town hall, but she did have a hand initially in this project, so we just want to recognize everybody who contributed. So, great team. So the motivation for the project, I can't speak for MAP, but I know for the Museum Assistance Program that is. But I know for our municipal council, having a strategic plan in place that identified this project was absolutely key. So being able to indicate that this was on our 5-year map for the museum and what we intended to accomplish allowed us to secure funding that I don't think we would have secured from our council otherwise. And it was also important in the Museum Assistance Program application process. The goal, as I mentioned, was to honor Currie as a figure of national historic significance and a source of community pride and identity. For those of you who have ever been to Strathroy, our claim to fame is the Turkey Festival. So as much as that's a nice accolade, as community development manager, we sort of discuss as staff, we want to find other sources of identity for our small community, Currie being an incredibly significant one. So this is, we're heading in the right direction. And also an effort to increase the profile of the museum on a regional and national level. So those 2 things go hand in hand, just trying to change sort of our perspective or other people's perspective of our community, but also our museum. When we set out to undertake this project, we had a museum volunteer group that was actually working to raise funds to erect a bronze statue of Currie outside of our museum. And I'm very pleased to announce that on August 4th, we will be unveiling that life-size bronze statue of Currie in front of our museum to coincide with the anniversary of the Great War, the start of the Great War. So a lot of things sort of coming together, a lot of groups looking to recognize Currie, and that set us down this path. That's just a photo of Currie upon his arrival back to Strathroy in 1919. They had a big homecoming celebration for him. Just a piece from our collection. And of course, recognizing who our funding partners are for this project. Haven't had a chance to formally meet Beverly, but I've talked to her on the phone, and I'll make a point to do that after the presentation. But Museum Assistance Program was instrumental in this project. We would not have been able to undertake this as a small community museum with a limited budget without that support. So just under $40,000 contributed from Museum Assistance Program for the 3-year project, and the balance of the project was supported by our municipal council. So now to the nuts and bolts of the presentation and how we designed it for the small community museum. Some of the presentations prior to this one, Museum of Nature and so on, there was fancy AutoCAD renderings of the exhibit. This is how we started out. It was like a napkin sketch with the 3 of us staff together scribbling down our ideas, and amazingly it didn't really deviate much from that, so it must have been a pretty good plan to start out with. But as Karen had mentioned at the outset of this presentation, we really wanted to draw from lessons learned hosting exhibits. So I won't name institutions, but we had many larger institutions from which we loaned exhibitions, and it was very clear that they were designed more for museums with multiple staff, preparators, all those many different job titles. So they'd come in and there'd be very heavy bases and large panels and such, and we would have one staff member, maybe a high school student volunteer trying to wrestle this 300-pound object off a truck. So we felt it was really important to make it very accessible, easy to get into your museum, very mobile, easy to set up and that sort of thing. So there was a focus on lightweight materials and ease of installation, aware of the limitations with different facilities and access to gallery space, conscious of limited staff resources for setup and tear down, and just flexibility in laying it out. So in contrast to the ROM, this would require like 600 to 1,000 square feet, and it can be squeezed or spread out as you need, so pretty easily accommodated at most venues. So what does it all include? We have 8 interpretive banners with the exhibit, 6 display cases, 3 cutout standees, which I'll describe a little bit more later, and an education kit. So a complete turnkey operation, no Lego project here, no crates to store. We actually designed our display cases to be the crates. Very easy to set up, and no complicated technology elements. We'd learned from past exhibits that they were more of a headache than they were worth, so we stuck to just the basics and focused on really the story and the visual elements that lend themselves to the exhibit. So for the cases, we looked at developing a case that was similar to a World War I shipping crate. And so they're designed in very rough ash wood, and that was from taking in exhibits from other institutions. We'd find you could tell where they had been scratched going through a doorway, jam, right? There'd be like the paint would be scratched off along the sides. So we felt if we could get a rough sort of pine-looking crate, then it could get beat up as it traveled around, and it would just add to the character of the exhibit. So that was the objective. This is very early in the process. The crates were later branded with shipping marks that would relate to Currie's story. So Strathroy, Amiens, Vimy, Passchendaele. So they were sort of marked to coincide with the story as well. The measurements were determined by the width of a standard single door and the height of a standard door. So if you, like your office door would be able to accommodate our exhibit, was our objective. Very large caster wheels so they could come on and off a ramp without any issue, because we had many instances where we would accept exhibits and they'd bottom out at the bottom of the ramp when they were coming off of a truck. So and all manufactured locally. So Ron rounding, I'm giving shout outs here for all the aspects of the project, but Ron rounding of Woodcraft of Essex, Ontario was exceptional in listening to our objectives and coming up with a slick design. He even found some aged sort of boat ropes that you can see, which makes them look more authentic and like crates, shipping crates. But it's also helpful if you do have, a threshold that you need to lift it up and over. Very functional design. Mounting of artifacts and labels. So we had some complicated pieces to mount. This being a German Maxim machine gun that was captured at the Battle of Amiens. A specific battle, Hatchet Wood, from that conflict, from a German machine gun nest, and part of the museum collection. We also produced some replicas for the more sensitive items that we wanted to incorporate into the display. And there are a lot of mounting challenges associated with this exhibit, and I'll just show you a few different pieces. Artillery shells. As part of telling the story of Currie, we also wanted to elaborate and look at the story of the First World War and Canadians in the First World War, both to show Currie's relationship with his troops. Currie is renowned for winning victories at the expense of shells, not lives. So that's sort of a famous quote that's associated with Currie. So we wanted to talk about his relationship with his troops, how he outfitted his troops with maps and made them aware of what they were getting into before battle, and then also relay that experience, the troop or the battlefield experience to the visitor. So we have some artillery shells that were turned into trophies, some unique pieces from our collection, trench shovel, helmets, those sorts of things. This is a model of the trench warfare model showing the creeping barrage technique that Currie was famous for perfecting in battle. And as I said, the sort of a mock-up or a maquette of this Currie monument that we're looking to unveil. The other key element of the exhibition was the interpretive banners. This aspect was really important to display because it represented about 80% of the work involved in the display. The research, the writing, getting copyright and permission to use images of Currie from the War Museum collection to the National Museum of Scotland. So there was a lot of paperwork involved and hunting involved in getting those images for this display. All the text and content was vetted and reviewed by Professor Jack Hyatt of University of Western Ontario. He's a noted biographer on Currie and an expert in Canadian military history. And so there's a lot of effort put into that, so the banners were a key piece. For ease of packing and unpacking, we decided to make them the retractable sort of banners. The downside is we're going to have to sort of monitor how they fare over time in shipping because they're pretty easy to damage. But we figured that museum folks are more gentle with things than most others, so we're going to see how that fares. But it made for very easy crating, and they can actually be tucked down and stored under the crates. So I'll show you that in the next slide. So there's a couple of our museum staff. They'd hate me for putting this in the slideshow, but that's Jordan and Crystal at the soft opening that we had before it went out to Victoria, BC on its first stop on the national tour. Just gives you a sense of the impact of some of the banners on the display. So as I said, under the crates there's a cavity that can store our education kit and our pop-up banners so that things are tucked away neatly and you're not having to pack so many different elements and have them at risk of being lost en route to their next destination. And then the other element that we included was these cutout standees created by PopTech of Richmond Hill. You often see these in a department store or grocery store advertising different products. This is actually, the picture doesn't do it justice, but it's a life-size horse, and it tied into the education kit, the programming aspect of the display, where we talked about the role of horses in the war, something to sort of tie in the interest of youth. This is Brock, Currie's charger that he took overseas and used during the First World War. The horse was actually brought back to the family farm just outside of Strathroy and is buried there as well, but just a neat tie-in. We also have a cutout of Currie being knighted by King George V on the battlefield on the left. And then a young portrait of Arthur Currie from Strathroy, about the age of 11. And then actually in the background you can see his homestead, the farm where he was raised, which still stands today. We felt that the standees basically gave another visual element to enhance the display and kind of gave some depth to the display. And just the last couple slides here, looking at how it packs up. So that's it. That's the whole thing. We purchased blankets for shipping. There's the education kit there on the bottom right, and the cutout standees in the cardboard sleeve. So it's a pretty easy exhibit to ship around. At this point, it has gone off to Victoria, BC, as I said. It's currently in Brandon, Manitoba, and we'll be back in Strathroy to coincide with the unveiling of the statue in August. And then we have a number of Ontario locations lined up. Some of the other shipping preparations that we had, we actually branded each of the cases in sort of a World War I era fashion, so that when the host location opens it up and looks at the exhibit manual, the banners very easily coincide with the correct case. There's some preparations for the first shipment. And then the maiden voyage, so heading off to Victoria, BC. I'm just hamming it up for the camera there. It's actually very light and easy to move, but I just thought there's a beautiful historic post office and customs house in downtown Strathroy in the background. And then lessons learned, things to fix when it comes back. So as many others mentioned, there's always issues and lessons to learn. So one of our mounts wasn't as effective as we had hoped. We had a helmet fall off and damage the case a little bit. We also learned that although we did have some ventilation within the plexiglass, you can create a microclimate within your display cases. And we had produced a replica tunic of Currie's tunic from the 5th BC Regiment Museum. And there may be, we're just going on pictures, but a little bit of mold on the sleeve because the case, when we cleaned the plexi and sealed it up, was a little moist. So always fun things to deal with. The moving blankets and the height of the cases is rather high. I think you saw on the previous slide, we're teetering off a ladder there. So lesson learned, and maybe having moving blankets that open on one side or two sides, you can slip them over. That would have been a good thought, and something we can modify though. And just additional padding and strapping for the plexiglass. We had a few very minor cracks on the plexi, as you can see there, that we need to address. So that's it for me, and I guess we'll take questions at the end, so I'll pass the pointer along.